This happened just last night. I live in the middle of nowhere in Nebraska, and my older cousin Odo and I were driving back home from the Home Depot in town, traveling at about 50 miles an hour, down a long stretch of road with fields on either side. And I'm not joking when I say that clowns started appearing out of the tall grass to our left, at least 9 or 10 of them, each of them looking at us. They all put out their arms and acted like they were going to grab the truck. I was at the wheel, and Odo called out, "Holy shit, really?" As we began driving past a few of them, one of the clowns, either because he was more daring than the others, or just couldn't see very well in his mask, got way too close to the road, and I hit the brakes, not to stop the car but to slow it down. When they saw us slowing down, they made to rush the truck. Alarmed that they were suddenly swarming us, I instinctively hit the gas again. I slammed the front right side of the truck directly into one of them, knocking him down against the pavement. Immediately all the other clowns started yelling and cursing, not really making to help their friend, but instead smashing their fists against the outside of the truck. Odo told me to put it in park, which I did, and he pulled a handgun from under the passenger seat. It was my uncle's gun, but I knew for a fact that it wasn't loaded because the firing pin was broken, and the gun wasn't able to fire. He rolled down the window and pointed the gun directly at one of the clowns. The clowns immediately backed off. Then he yelled, "Give me a reason!" For a moment, there was just silence as the clowns backed away a few steps, but not enough for me to hit the gas and safely floor it out of there. Odo gestured to the clown on the pavement. "Is he alright?" The clown on the ground started crawling with his hands and knees, and was shuffling away. Another clown carefully helped him to his feet. "Make a space." Odo gestured with the gun to the clowns in front of the truck, and they immediately parted. I put the car into drive, and slowly started edging forward. "We have a dash cam, so don't bother calling the cops." Odo kept the gun pointed at all of them, until we were far enough away, then rolled the passenger window back up. Seeing all those clowns clumped in the middle of the road in my rearview mirror was one of the strangest things I had ever seen. Odo placed the gun back under the seat, before muttering that he hoped that the headlight wasn't cracked. When we got home, we opened some beers and watched Game of Thrones, and didn't even bring it up to my uncle when he got home. We didn't actually have a dash cam, but figured that there was no way for the clowns to know that for certain. I hope they learned something from this, because next time, I don't plan on hitting the brakes.
Back when it was originally released, I really wanted to get my hands on a new Xbox One X. You know the one. It was 4K ready with a considerably faster processor. So naturally, I tried absolutely everything in my power to get one as immediately as I could. My local Walmart was having one of those Black Friday sales, and like so many others, I stood patiently in line, waiting to try and beat the rush to grab one. But I was nowhere near sprightly or fortunate enough to actually get one that way. So after failing to get one in person, I then tried getting one online. But as rapidly as I wanted one to own, the users who were reselling them were asking way too much money, and I simply couldn't afford to shell out double, or sometimes triple the price. After weeks of trying to find a way to get a hold of one, I had to come to the conclusion that it just wasn't to be. It was then that I had something of a stroke of luck. Although I had resorted to Craigslist in my desperation, I did actually find someone that was selling their Xbox One X at no more than the original buying price of the console. Naturally, I was skeptical. For the life of me, I simply couldn't fathom why they would do something like that, but one thought overrode all others. If I didn't put in a bid now, someone else would, and I could kiss my chance of owning a One X goodbye. I immediately emailed the seller and let them know that I was very interested. Not only that, but I had the cash on hand and was ready to go. I also offered to pay for gas or whatever it would take to get the console delivered to my door. I figured that would be a pretty appealing offer to someone who I guessed was just strapped for cash around the holidays. I was stunned to get an almost instantaneous response, stating that they did still have the Xbox and were in fact still waiting for a proper bid from a serious buyer. They politely asked for a delivery address so they could bring it over as soon as possible. I was sort of hesitant to divulge such personal information and asked if it would be a better idea to first meet in public since it was much safer that way. I'll be honest, I wasn't too pleased with the idea of a total stranger coming over to my house, but he informed me that he was going to be very busy running holiday errands all day and that there would only be some pretty specific windows of opportunity to drop it off. It would be much more convenient for him if he was about to come over to my house. I was still not particularly ecstatic about the idea, but oh man, I really wanted that new 4K Xbox. So in the end, I agreed and texted the dude my home address. I figured it was safer than me going over to his place. At least this way I'd be on home turf. I was so happy and eager to get my hands on that new console, and that excitement only grew as I began waiting for the guy to turn up. But he took his sweet time. I mean, hours and hours passed by before I began to suspect that he wasn't going to actually show. Around 1 in the afternoon, 4 hours after he was due, I was seriously losing my cool, thinking it was a prank or something. I tried texting the guy back, asking him where he was. Previously, I had gotten pretty timely responses from the guy, but this time I didn't hear a single thing from him. By 6 that evening, I just lost all hope. I assumed that he got a better offer from someone else and didn't have the heart to tell me he picked a new buyer. I was disappointed, more than words can possibly describe. I'd gotten myself so psyched, and I can't even tell you how deflated I was. It's one thing not to have gotten the item from the store. I could come to terms with that. But I was so close to having one in my hands, it sucked having my hopes dashed so cruelly like that. And that didn't mean I'd given up entirely. So for the rest of the night, I kept looking around on Craigslist and other sites to find a new Xbox One X that was within my price range. But as I was getting ready to wind down for bed, I heard something. At first I had dismissed it as the wind or something, that it was maybe just my imagination. But then I heard it again. Someone knocking. Not at my front door, but lightly on the TV room window. I walked up to the bedroom window and peered out into the driveway, seeing this strange-looking dude at my front door, looking around as if checking the coast is clear. I'm suspicious, but I go downstairs to see what he wants. He identified himself as the guy who had the Xbox, apologized for being so late, and explained he had gotten backtracked with errands during his day. Then he casually asked if I still had the money. I opened the door all the way, but still kept the screen door closed as a precaution. Something just didn't feel right, like at all. I told him that, yeah, I still had the cash on me, but I didn't see that he had anything with him, so I calmly asked if he had brought the Xbox with him, like if it's still in his car or anything. As expected, he told me it was out in his van. He told me to get the money and come out to the van with him, and he would get it for me. I let him know that I wasn't really comfortable walking out to his van, but he seems to understand and tells me it was all good. I briefly look over the guy's shoulder and see that there is in fact someone else sitting there in the van. Not only that, but the dude at my door has been keeping his hands concealed in the little front pouch of his hoodie the whole time while talking to me, and there was definitely something more than just his hands in there. Don't ask me how I could tell. I just could. You know when you just get a gut feeling about something? Yeah, that. I tried to stay as chill as possible as I lied to him that I'd just go fetch my wallet and return in a minute. His mood immediately changed as I closed the door in his face before locking it. I then make the split-second decision, better to be safe than sorry, so I pull my phone out of my shorts and dial 911. But as I do, I heard a loud thud on my front door, then the sound of the van's engine revving before it zooms off into the night. When I went to check and see if he had damaged my door, I nearly peed my pants when I saw a rusty old hatchet buried in the wood. I was right that he had something in his sweatshirt, and that I shouldn't go out to the van with him. Be careful who you're buying from, folks. You never know who's behind the username. I witnessed someone end their life at McDonald's. It happened a couple of years ago, and I don't really like to think about it too much. I thought sharing my story with people online would make it a little easier, so here it is. This is kind of my attempt to make peace with the situation, and I hope that the soul of this poor man is resting in peace. I don't remember a lot of the details. It all seems really fuzzy, like it was all just a bad dream that never should have happened. I do remember some stuff, though. I remember it was raining. It was 2 weeks before Christmas. I remember that I had just finished working overtime, so it was pretty late. I wanted to grab a quick bite to eat, but didn't feel like eating in my car. I always hate doing that, especially because of the smell, so I went in. I got a Big Mac from McDonald's. I was sitting in the corner of the store when I noticed a really tall man walk inside. He was dressed in standard winter clothes and had a long blue hat on. There was a lot of empty space inside of the hat on top of his head, and I don't remember exactly why it caught my attention. I watched him for a few minutes. I wasn't particularly interested. I was just sitting there eating and didn't really have anything else to look at. My phone was dead, and he was the only other customer in McDonald's at the time. His body language stood out to me, though. I could tell that he was not in a good frame of mind. I mean, looking at this guy for a minute told you everything you needed to know about him. He was suffering and in a lot of pain. I'm not sure exactly what kind of pain. I could only make guesses. Maybe his wife had left him. Maybe his kids died. I'll never know what happened to him. All I will ever know is that it was bad enough to push him to the very edge, and enough to make him jump off. He stood in front of the cashier for a few minutes while he appeared to be looking at the menu. To this day, I don't know if he was actually considering ordering anything or if he was just waiting for the right moment to. So this was the layout of the store. On one side of the McDonald's, there was the counter where people could order their food, but the counter area didn't take up the entire wall. There was a separation between that and a small hallway that brought you to the bathrooms. I was on the other side of the McDonald's looking on. He had been standing there for a few minutes when he randomly decided to start walking down the hallway. He moved really slowly, like he was really trying to take his time. Step by step, he came closer and closer to death. And the weirdest part about the whole situation was that he didn't seem sad. Didn't feel like he was depressed. It was more of an apathy, like he had suffered so much that he just didn't care anymore, couldn't bring himself to bother with being alive. I don't know, maybe I just feel that way after having thought about this experience so much over the last few years. As he continued down the hallway, he got slower with each step, finally coming to a halt in front of the men's bathroom. He stood there for about 45 seconds. I'm not sure what he was planning on doing. My first reaction was that there was some kind of sign in front of the men's bathroom that it was closed, but that wasn't the case. I saw him pull something out of his coat pocket. He very slowly pointed it at his head. It was a pistol. It wasn't until I heard the gunshot that it registered what was happening. I saw blood go all over the place. His body fell to the floor with a thud. I screamed. I didn't know what else to do. I remember vomiting everything I had just eaten on what was left of my meal. If I hadn't been so disturbed, I would probably have been extremely grossed out, but I was in an absolute state of shock. I started speaking with one of the employees after a few minutes had gone by. He screamed what had happened. I told him that he pulled a gun out of his pocket and shot himself with it. One of the employees there was convinced that he had been shot by someone else, strongly hinting that it was me. I didn't quite understand why they thought so. Some disgruntled old woman, she was old, and told the police that she didn't think that the guy ended his own life. Whatever her motivation was, it really didn't matter. The police didn't take her very seriously from the start, and this obviously was done by his own doing. The security tapes proved as much. I'm not going to lie. It really bothered me that she had to make an already bad situation worse. I already answered some of the questions from the police officers about the story. I remember driving home that night. I remember how alone I felt. This had really taken a toll on me. I pray for that guy's soul every day. I really hope he's in a better place. I can't imagine how horrible things must have been for him that he would have offed himself in a public place like that. I haven't eaten out since this whole experience. I have the strange fear that I'm going to witness another one in public like that. I know it's not rational, but I definitely feel that way. I'm not sure why. I'm not sure why this happened, and I probably never will.
I got this great job working at a hospital. I really got to do something that I enjoy. Taking care of others has always been a passion of mine, but I work on one of the hardest floors, the cancer floor. We always have the same patients, and not a whole lot of them make it. This makes my job hard in a lot of ways. You could probably guess that I've seen my fair share of death since I started here. Anyway, I work the night shift, and at night it can be a little creepy when you have to go to the morgue. One night, me and a coworker were taking someone down to the morgue. Now, let me explain. Our morgue is a little freezer box that is in the basement, and it smells horrible. Plus, it has a ramp to get into it. So she and I wheel the body down there, and we push it up the ramp. And then we begin to argue over who is going to push the body inside. Of course, I lose, so I swing the freezer door open, and I push in the body. Then I slam the door shut. We start to fill out our paperwork when we both look up at each other. She says to me, "Did you hear that?" I said, "I think so." We both turn and look at the door. The two of us got cold chills, and the hairs on our arms were standing straight up. It sounded like someone was crying. We froze, turned, and looked at each other, then ran out. Halfway down the hall, she asked if I really heard what she did, and I told her yes. I really didn't know what to think, so I was telling one of my friends who is a nurse on our floor the story. She tells me that she has had similar things happen to her in the morgue. To this day, I will not go alone, and I always try to get out of going at all. We also have a tradition on our floor that when someone passes away, we open the window so the soul of that person is not trapped in the hospital to roam. I'm not making this up. It truly happened. If you don't believe me, I don't care. I know, and so does everyone else who works there.
I have worked at 4 different hotels. One of my owners once told me that any hotel over 10 years old will have had deaths in it. The only hotels that don't are because they are brand new. So I started asking the others on my call-arounds. Every hotel in my area had at least one death in the past 3 years, if not more. If it's had deaths, then 100% are haunted, and 100% of older hotels are guaranteed to be haunted. In my 6 years, I worked shift for 2 deaths at different hotels. One natural, one worse. My ex worked at a hotel with one room that was never rented and used as storage because it was the site of a well-known serial killer double homicide back in the 60s. Deaths in hotels are not rare. I do not subscribe to the death equals haunted formula. Of my hotels, only one acted haunted in my time there. I was strictly night shift, sometimes 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., sometimes 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. At 11 p.m. I would get to lock all the doors and deal with people through a night window. I love this, as I generally dislike people, but I am good at acting the part of wonderful customer service employee. Hospitality is my middle name, but after 11 p.m. I got to close off my domain of lobby/office, front desk, and breakfast room, all combined, and be left alone till breakfast. So I think that's all the setup I need for you to know about my private little kingdom, under lock and key where all this takes place during my solo hours. A few weeks into my job, I was scrolling on my phone and bam, the breakfast room doors thundered, then rattled to a stop like they'd been kicked by a mule. I glanced at my security camera, which focuses on those doors. Nothing there. I rewind a few seconds. Nothing, so I go a bit further. Still nothing. A full minute back and rewatch it till the moment I see myself jump on office cam. Nothing. The doors don't even move. But I've heard kids slam those double French doors. That's what they sound like. That's where the noise came from. I walked around the office, lobby, and breakfast room, peering out the windows because maybe I'd heard a car wreck. Nothing. I check my bucket. Nobody is in the room above my office or breakfast rooms. These are often the ones we sell last at the morning activity, or me playing music for myself at night, and it sometimes disturbs people. This exploding door kick becomes a theme, but it's not just the breakfast room doors. It's the lobby doors that I can clearly see out from my perch behind the counter. Even more unnerving, the private office entrance door that is unlabeled and only employees use to enter the back of the front desk becomes a target for these sporadic, unseen kicks. I keep a FD journal of anything that happens during our shift, anything that might be an issue for other shifts, complaints, special requests, anything out of the norm. I start noting the sounds in the journal and ask my coworkers if they've noticed any strange noises. Nobody else has, even the other night shift workers, but they did have a high turnover rate. Other than the front desk manager and housekeepers within 6 months, I was the next longest employee. Other night shifters never lasted than 3 months, and I worked every Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, so they always got weekends off work always, but never stayed long. Next, the ice machine started coming on and just spitting ice out onto the breakfast room floor. This was less common than the booming doors, but it happened a handful of times in my 2 years there. It never happened on anyone else's shift as far as I could find out. The owners just said it was a machine malfunction and mostly ignored me, telling me just to clean it up when it happened and reminded me to put out a wet floor caution sign if it was near breakfast time. Yet the owners were Indian, and after this started showing up at dawn and blessing my kingdom more often. After that was the clicking. If you've ever heard a dog that needs its nails trimmed trotting across a hardwood floor, that's the noise. At first I was on the lookout for a big rat or other critter, but security cameras and my vigilant search armed with a broom yielded nothing. I still told the owners to call pest control to be safe, but they found no evidence of a furry friend, caught nothing, and bait traps were left untouched. This became a routine sound too. Near the end of my time there, I was on my phone with a friend one night on the far back of my office, away from the desk in the L part where my industrial coffee makers are, and a small whiteboard we used to track daily numbers flew off the wall and smacked me almost square in the face, then dropped to the floor at my feet. It was odd because it's fallen before and it ends up straight down on what we call the load desk, where the manager works during the day. I was several steps away, say roughly 8 feet from that desk. There was no breeze to make it travel at an angle, and even if it had, it was mounted just barely above face level for me. It had to travel nearly straight sideways to smack me in the mug. I laughed it off, but I really kicked myself for not using my camera and getting a recording of the security footage at the time. It's the strongest evidence I've ever had of any of my paranormal events, and I just derped out. I guess I did have bigger issues in my life at the time that I was talking to a friend about, but boy was I dumb. Feel free to tell me how dumb I was. If it speaks to how distracted I was during that time in my life, that was when I worked straight through a death 1 empty room away from my office, and didn't even notice.
There are 2 types of people who work at McDonald's, or fast food places in general. There are ambitious, intelligent people who are trying to work hard to achieve a goal, in the hopes that one day they'll be able to quit for the sake of something better. And then there are the losers, those with no ambition who have given up and have no desire to achieve anything other than a weekly paycheck. I like to consider myself in the first category, as I was working hard to afford my apartment while taking classes at the local community college. I normally work the later shifts at the drive-thru window, which is the one spot most employees hated working the most. You constantly have to deal with extremely impatient, oftentimes very rude people who are on their phones or have music blaring, and oftentimes don't realize that I wasn't the individual who took their order, so it's not my fault if it's wrong. In addition to that, you're pretty much constantly on your feet and exposed to the elements. No matter how cold, windy, or rainy it is, you have to keep leaning out into it, wishing that you were in a warm car about to drive away from this place. My point being is please try to be more kind and patient with the drive-thru people. Yeah, some are lazy, but most are trying their best, and even though you only see them for about half a minute, a kind remark or a warm smile might make their day. Anyways, now that I've gotten that off my chest, I work the late shift with two people who I believe qualify for the second category of employees. Connie was a high school dropout who was almost always late and was never invested in what she was doing, and Harold was a deadbeat who often smelled like weed and only kept the job because otherwise his parents would throw him out of the house. He was 32 years old. So one night I was there after 11 p.m. by the drive-thru window on an extremely cold January night, flipping through the pages of my class notes and trying to keep warm by the fry machine. Connie was mopping while looking at her phone, and Harold was in the back probably getting baked in the walk-in cooler. That late at night we rarely got customers, and if we did, they were almost always zonked-out college kids who used the drive-thru but never physically walked into the restaurant. I stood up and stretched my legs and told Connie that I was heading to the bathroom. It was around 11:30 at this point. I came back less than 5 minutes later, with Connie more or less in the same spot that she was before. I walked past her and turned the corner to return to the window, and froze dead in my tracks. There was a bald man in white face makeup and a black hoodie standing directly outside the window staring in. His eyes were wide, with a blank expression that read, "What kind of trouble can I create?" The figure made direct eye contact with me and smirked, and slammed his palm against the window. I had no idea what to do, and inside my head, the words, clown, mime, psychopath, danger, and death all exploded like fireworks. The window was already shut and locked to protect myself from the cold, but the doors were all unlocked, and this person could easily walk right in and grab any one of us if he wanted to. In my head I kept referring to it as he, but honestly I had no idea what the gender was. The outfit and makeup made the stranger look androgynous. Maybe that was the point. The figure slapped on the glass window again with its hand. "Open," drawing out the word like a snake. Now even if the figure wasn't dressed like that, I was under no obligation to open the window. It's unlawful to serve walk-ups at the drive-thru window, certainly for their safety but also for ours. I shook my head and backed away. I called over my shoulder, "Lock the doors." The whole time this figure didn't break eye contact with me, and to the best of my memory, I don't even remember it blinking. It drew back its lips in a sinister smile, and I shit you not, its gums were black. I don't mean I was too far away that I couldn't see clearly. I mean its gums were as black as licorice. "Open," it hissed again, louder this time. Its other hand slammed against the window, and it licked its lips with its tongue. "Open." That's when a third hand slammed itself into the window. A left hand, and it was just as pale and as skeletal as the other two. I lost my shit. "Holy shit! Call the cops!" I screamed, and ran back into the office, which was the only room with a locking door and no windows. I heard Connie scream, "What the fuck?" And she dropped her mop and flew across the room and made for the back with me. All the yelling attracted Harold, and I shoved past him into the office and told him to look at the security camera. Sure enough, the white-faced creeper looked to have 3 hands on the window and was tilting its head back and forth, perhaps trying to discover where I ran off to. We locked the office door and called the cops, explaining to the operator that there was at least 2 prowlers outside acting in a threatening manner towards us. I kind of expected it to be over after I called the cops. If it was a prank, they would run once they realized they scared me enough to call 911. But it didn't end there. We watched as the figure left the drive-thru window, circled the building, and made for the restaurant door. "Is there a second one? Look for a second one," I panicked while still on the phone with the operator. Connie was freaking out, and Harold was muttering something about not getting the police involved, likely because he was carrying weed. That's when the power went out. Everything. Cameras, lights, phone, the whole building went down. And barely 10 seconds after we all quieted down after shouting at each other in the dark, we heard footsteps in the dining room area. "Connie, did you lock the doors?" I whispered. She didn't reply. I think she had her hand pressed over her mouth.
"Oh, Ben."
We heard a voice call from outside the room in the dark.
"Oh, Ben."
The shout came at least 3 more times, circling from the kitchen to right off the hallway where we were hiding. I was convinced I was about to die, and every decision I had made in my life that brought me there was flashing before my eyes. We heard footsteps pass the office. After another few minutes, we heard the wail of police sirens outside, and at any moment, we expected to hear gunfire and the police shouting at someone to get on the ground, but we never did. We waited until the police identified themselves, and opened the door and ran out into the parking lot. Since the power was down, we couldn't show the cops the security footage, so we just told them what we saw. They swept the whole building and said it was clear. The owner of that particular franchise store showed up about an hour later, after Harold and Connie had left. I waited for the power to be restored, so an officer could escort me back inside to collect my belongings. The next day my manager called me and asked me to work the night shift. I asked him if the creep from last night had been caught. When he said, "There was no creep," I told him I quit and hung up the phone. This story is completely true. I have no idea what caused the power outage, which apparently erased all the security footage from the day. Without proof on video, my manager and the cops concluded that it was an elaborate prank, but that third hand still bothers me to this day, even more so than its hungry, inhuman eyes. Sure, it could have been a prank, but I wish someone would just confirm that for me, so I can sleep again. Keep your windows locked at night, and if you hear someone tapping from behind the curtains, don't open them.
This story took place about 3 years ago. I started my new job working at a morgue that was about 3 miles into the countryside. For the first week, everything went fine. I got shown around the building, how everything works, and I understood my job. That was until I met the guy who used to deliver the bodies to the morgue. His name was Kenny. I first met him on the elevator. We shook hands and he made an inappropriate joke. He also stunk of smoke, had long greasy hair, bad yellow teeth, and a faded, poorly drawn tattoo of a snake on his forearm. My first thought that he was just weird. I figured I would only see him from time to time when he delivered the bodies. That wasn't the case, however, as he would come up into the building and talk to the staff. Apparently he had worked there for years and knew everybody. I asked a few staff members about him, and they kind of just shrugged him off as being eccentric. It was like I was the only one who saw through that. He would joke around with most people, but when it came to me, it was like he was a different person. The first time we met, he would make inappropriate jokes towards me. He would joke about the dead bodies that got delivered and make crude comments about the way the people died, and actually found it funny. One night, however, I was working on a body when I decided to take a little break. When I returned, I found the body was off the table and propped up against the wall. I almost had a heart attack. And then Kenny jumped out from the corner, screaming and grabbing my shoulder, shaking me violently. Then he stopped and laughed, telling me how good he got me, and my reaction was hilarious. This was the last straw, and I had enough and reported this to my superiors. My complaint was backed up by the footage from the CCTV cameras. The next evening, as I arrived into work, I saw Kenny walking down the corridor, and he didn't have his weird grin on his face. His look was much more disturbing. He looked furious, like he was a different person. He passed by me while giving me the worst stare I've ever seen. I was told later that he had been fired. I was a little bit surprised. I didn't know what they would do. I didn't know they would fire him exactly, but I was kind of relieved. That night, I finished work around 3 a.m. and got into my car to drive home. As soon as I pulled out, another car started up from across the parking lot and started to instantly tailgate me. Like I said, the building was located in the country, so there were no other cars on the road. At first, I didn't know who this was. I pulled over to see if the car would keep going, but as soon as I pulled over, the car slammed on its brakes. That was when Kenny came running out of his car and over to mine, yanking on the door handle as hard as he could, while banging on the window screaming for me to get out of the car. I thought he was going to rip the door off and kill me. I quickly started my car back up and drove off as fast as I could. I saw Kenny get into his car. For some reason, he didn't chase me. I'm not sure if his car wouldn't start or he just decided not to pursue me. Either way, I was relieved. I later informed my superior of what happened. I didn't find out what happened, whether the police were involved or what, but I never saw Kenny again after that. Thinking what might have happened if somehow Kenny did manage to open my door keeps me awake at night.
My name is Ken, and the other day I was watching videos on YouTube, and one of them was why people experience paranormal activity or feel like they live in a haunted house. One of the reasons that people experience things supernatural or paranormal is for a punishment of an action you did or didn't do. I found it interesting because about 4 years ago, I had a very strange and frightening experience. The job I worked for was changing things around, and it asked me to work later. So for a short period of time, I was driving home late night every night. One night when I was driving, it was cold, raining, and I was very tired. I wasn't used to the late nights just yet. As I was driving, I noticed a hitchhiker on the side of the road with his hand out asking for a ride. I never picked up a hitchhiker and didn't plan to then. In my mind, it was too dangerous. So I drove past him. I didn't look back at all. A few miles down the road, I saw another hitchhiker. It was like it was the same person that I drove past, but this time, they weren't holding out their hand. I was having trouble keeping my eyes open, so I stopped at the next gas station I found to get an energy drink. I went inside the gas station, grabbed an energy drink, and stood at the counter waiting for the cashier to come back, wherever he was. As I was waiting, I looked outside and it looked like the hitchhiker was standing in the parking lot looking towards the gas station. At that point, the cashier came to the counter, and when I looked back outside, the hitchhiker was gone. I thought I just needed some sleep. I got in my car and carried on driving home. About 5 minutes passed when I saw the same hitchhiker standing on the side of the road. I looked in the mirror and briefly saw a man in the back seat watching me. This scared me and made me jump so much I nearly lost control of the car. I stopped the car, got out, and checked the back seat and saw no one. I stood there trying to calm down and catch my breath. After calming down, I got back in my car and continued driving. The whole ride home, I was afraid to look in my mirror. Even though I didn't see that man again, I still felt him sitting there watching me. I never came up with a logical explanation of what I experienced that night. Before watching that video about paranormal crap, I always thought it was my lack of sleep that caused me to see things. But now I think what I was seeing was that man on the road and in my car was some kind of punishment for not picking him up.
A couple of years ago, I worked at a McDonald's in Kansas. It was a location with a large outdoor play place for the kids. In all honesty, if it wasn't for that thing, I probably would have kept my job much longer. Part of my responsibilities included maintaining the cleanliness and safety of the big, colorful, large, intestine-looking pyramid of tubes and slides. It goes without saying that kids are messy, and whenever one had a bathroom-related accident or there was an injury, I had to go clean and sterilize the thing the best I could. I'm a relatively small person, so I was able to access most of the spots in the play place just fine, and because of that, I knew the maze-like structure very well. It's ironic that I went to school to design skyscrapers, and the closest I ever got to that was becoming an expert with the inner workings of a McDonald's child trap. One night after work, my friend Nate and I decided to hang out and have a smoke before we drove home. The play place was closed even though the restaurant was still open, but instead of sitting in our cars, we unlocked the gate and wandered into the enclosure where the mini playground was, locking the gate behind us. Technically, we probably shouldn't have been doing that, but I felt given how much time and sweat I sacrificed to this thing, I had earned the relative privacy it could provide me. I sat at the base of one of the large tube slides and lit my cigarette, while Nate sat on a bench directly across from me. We had been talking for about 10 minutes. I shifted my weight in preparation to stand up, when from within the slide, something grabbed me hard on the shoulder. What felt like a large hand grabbed my left shoulder, tight enough to make my joints pop, and I felt an index finger and thumb brush the skin of my neck. I screamed and launched myself up and sprinted to the exit, pulling at the door frantically before remembering that it was locked and I had the key. As Nate assaulted me with questions about what just happened, I tried to catch my breath and stared back at the slide, waiting for a fellow coworker to emerge and laugh, having played a great practical joke on me. But nothing happened. I didn't hear a thing from within the structure. I unlocked the gate, walked out, and slammed it shut, and locked it again. I ran back into the restaurant, and immediately went to the back office to check the security video. The entrance and the spot where I had been sitting was monitored, as were two other angles that showed the majority of the small gated area, but there was still about a third of the structure that we couldn't see. After about 5 minutes of watching the monitors closely, I called a friend of mine who was a cop. He drove in about 15 minutes later, and together we walked back into the play place area, armed with flashlights and mace. We examined the entire structure. Not only was there no one there, but there were no signs that anyone had been hiding inside or had broken in. I was at a complete loss for words and feeling very foolish, but I knew with certainty that I had been grabbed. I barely slept that night, and the following morning I came in early to review the entire tape from the previous night. Not once did anyone emerge from the slide or the gate. Before we opened the place to the kids again, myself and the biggest coworker I had went through the whole thing again, but again, there was nothing found. The play place is completely enclosed within a fenced-in area, with only one gate leading in or out. The fence is around 8 feet high, not impossible to climb, but it would be extremely difficult. To this day, I'm still at a loss to explain what happened. Some people I tell this to are convinced I experienced something paranormal and that the play place is haunted. Others think I'm the victim of an extremely well thought out practical joke. At this point, I wouldn't even be angry to discover that. I'm just desperate to learn how it was done. I quit the job about 4 or 5 months after the incident. What bothers me the most is that if there was a living, breathing person there, they would have had to silently prop themselves up in that slide, fighting gravity, barely making a sound or breathing for me to have missed them, and then after they grabbed me, climbed back up the tunnel without making a sound. I didn't hear a whisper of movement behind me, or even feel the faintest hint of breath on the back of my neck. I really hope one day to discover the truth behind what happened, and why.
We were visiting a friend's house. After a couple of hours, my mom and my friend's mom asked us to go fetch something from my house. So we go back to my home, which is a long way from his, and the walk seemed uncomfortably long and creepy and had an eerie atmosphere for some reason. After ages of walking, we reach my house and we get the thing they needed, which was inside the house. So I unlocked the door and got the object, and I noticed the bathroom door was lit and the exhaust fan was on, which we usually turn off unless someone is using the toilet. But I didn't give that any attention and thought my dad was using the toilet since he wasn't in my friend's house when we left. So me and my buddy decided to wait outside the house for my dad to finish, and I occasionally went to the small window outside the bathroom and called for my dad, but I didn't get an answer. But I heard someone humming and singing, so I thought that he was having a good time. After a good half an hour passed, I started feeling uneasy and told my friend we had to leave because our parents are probably angry now. When we arrived at his house, we were shocked to see my dad sitting and talking to my friend's parents. We asked him, "Where were you?" And he said, "I didn't go anywhere. I just stayed here since we first came." This made me scared because my family had been here for 3 hours, and we just waited for my dad for 1 hour. I go ask my sister the same question and get the same response. Someone was surely in my bathroom. After the visit is done, we go back home just to find the front door, which I locked and unlocked, and the bathroom door was wide open. My family acted normally, but I was completely freaking out, and I couldn't get any sleep that night. Since the last time I babysat, back when I was 16 in the early 80s. I'd just gotten a driver's license and needed gas and insurance money for the old beat-up car I'd bought. I was watching two boys, about 6 and 10, while parents went out to celebrate some anniversary or something. They had promised to be home at 11. At the time, cell phones were pretty rare, so no way to contact them other than calling the restaurant. Evening was going great until about 9:30 when their large, aggressive Doberman goes crazy running around the house barking and growling before running into the basement, refusing to come up. Sort of freaks me out a bit because this dog is huge, aggressive, and very protective of the house and kids. I do a quick check of the house and kids and everyone was okay. I let the dog stay in the basement, put kids to bed at around 10 as instructed by the parents. Job done. So I'm watching TV at around 10:30 when, suddenly, I begin to smell something burning. Running into the youngest boy's room and find the oldest boy in bed with him. Both are asleep, so I wake them both and tell them that we need to get the dog and go outside. But the dog just straight up refuses to leave the basement. And I had to prioritize. So I get the kids outside and tell them to sit in the front yard while I go in to call the fire department. Not showing good judgment here, but I was 16. Oldest says, "I left a candle burning under my bed." As I go back in. Yup, a candle under their bed, since apparently monsters couldn't live anywhere where there's light. I know, dumb kids. As I open the door to go back in, there's this huge explosion behind me across the street and power goes out. The kids start screaming and follow me back into the house. I grab the phone, but there's no dial tone. I get the kids out of the house again, onto the back porch this time and make it really clear that they're to stay there. But I can still hear the dog whimpering in the basement. I run to the oldest kid's bedroom with the fire extinguisher and flashlight from the kitchen and look under the bed through hazy smoke. The offending candle has gone out, but has burnt a hole in the box spring, which also has gone out. I flip the box spring and blast it with the extinguisher just in case. I then run to the front porch to see the transformer on a telephone pole had exploded. A lightning pole... What? Lighting the pole on fire and taking out the phone and electricity service for the street. I run and check on the box springs, which are still out. I open the bedroom windows to air out the room, then get the kids off the back porch into the living room onto the couch, where they both are just crying their eyes out. The oldest was apologizing for the fire, but insisted that if he didn't keep the candle lit, then, of course, monsters would get him. Fire department shows up for the transformer at around 11. Kids fall asleep on the couch at around midnight after watching the firemen across the street put out the transformer fire. And the power comes back on at about 1:30 a.m. The parents show up at 2:30 a.m. when they were supposed to be back by 11. They're somewhat buzzed and start complaining that the kids are not in bed and the oldest room is trashed with a flipped-over mattress and dry fire extinguisher powder covering the box springs. And to add insult to injury, they straight up refuse to pay me. The situation gets really tense, and would you believe it? The Doberman picks this time to come out of the basement and starts aggressively growling at me. Walked out with $1 to my name, and I never babysat again.
A few years back, I was a shift manager for a local big box pharmacy and convenience store. It was right across my backyard, and I could probably sprint there in under a minute if I really wanted to, so it really worked out for me. I was in my late 30s. I worked out quite a lot, and while I was fit, I was still a smaller girl. Even though I was married, I would constantly get hit on and asked out. It was pretty flattering, but it always made me feel really awkward. Now, this particular store I worked at was in a really weird part of town. It was on the right side of town to attract the Karens, but close enough to the not-so-good side of town to attract the drug addicts, drunks, and psychopaths. Anyway, let me say that I'm not someone that gets scared easily. I've had someone high on meth crash their car into the side of the store, causing the back of our store to bend inward because we didn't carry pineapple juice. I had a man pick me up and throw me over his shoulder and start walking out the door with me, saying that I'd make a good wife. Yeah, that's one for another time. Anyways, it all started on a Sunday morning. I remember this because I was really busy building end caps and making sell signs. I was working with my favorite coworker, so the day was flying by and I was really bubbly this day. There was a man and his son that came into the store and they made a beeline for me. The man was probably just a little under 6 foot, and he was skinny. The man had dreadlocks and a long skinny silver earring dangling from his ear. He also had this really tan trench coat that I found really odd because it was summer. Nonetheless, though, I had then greeted them and asked if they needed some help. The man spoke with a really thick Jamaican accent, and he said that his GPS stopped working, and he wanted to see if we had any. I let out a really small laugh, thinking he was messing with me. No, that would be at Best Buy or something, but we do have a small section of electronics on this wall over here. I indicated the wall to the back of me.
Oh, thanks,
he said, taking a look but also keeping his eyes on me. Something about those eyes just really chilled me. He was speaking another language to his son, but I kept going on about my task for the day, and he would call me to help him, asking me questions about chargers and SD cards. I answered them, and then he started telling me how beautiful I was. Really awkwardly, I had thanked him.
You must work out, yeah?
He asked. Yeah, yoga mostly, I replied while getting more and more uncomfortable now. He made some more comments about my body, telling me how he loved my tattoos, and he was just really being a creep. I tried to stay polite though, and eventually I just walked away to do some more work. I started to avoid him, but he was still staring at me. The man had his phone out, and I kept hearing the shuddering of a camera. I went to the office to tell my other coworker that I thought the guy was taking my picture, and I was just really feeling uncomfortable. He then came out and watched over me. Shortly after my coworker came out, the man and his son then left. By the time the end of my shift came, I forgot about him. A few weeks later, I was up front ringing customers with a different coworker. We were crazy busy that day, but I was the manager on duty. After we got the line down, my coworker then handed me an envelope. What's this? I asked her. I don't know, some man in dreadlocks told me to give it to you, she said. I took the envelope and I went into my office with it. Inside of the envelope were dozens and dozens of pictures of me. My heart sank. I had no idea that these were taken. Most of them were of me in the store while working, some of me walking home, and some even with me and my daughter. I felt sick. There was also a note with it. It said something along the lines of,
You're so beautiful. I'm in love with you. I'd be a much better husband than what you have now. Please give me a chance.
There was more to it, but it's in police evidence now. The guy really stupidly left his name and address. I then called our store manager as well as the police. They took our camera footage, my statement, and the pictures and letter. They told him that he really needed to stay away from me or the next time he's getting arrested and he's banned from the store. I was really relieved, but still really bothered by it. A few more weeks to about a month then went by. It was another really busy Sunday night. It was just myself as the manager on duty, and we had another coworker as my cashier. We were ringing things up together when I noticed a man staring at me. The man was tall with a medium build. He had dreadlocks and he had the same earring and long trench coat as the other man did. This man was really scary. His eyes were just cold and really dead and angry. It felt like they were staring right through my soul. He didn't have anything to purchase, just stood and stared. I tried to smile politely at him, then another wave of customers came. I got lost in helping everyone, but didn't see the man anymore. Even when things calmed down, I still didn't see him. I decided to go start facing the back of the store, and I told my coworker to call me if she needed me. As I was back there, I heard that Jamaican accent and all over. I looked up at the mirror to see that same scary man on the phone.
Yeah, she's here. No, it's just one other girl here with her. I can grab her when she leaves. No problem.
I was absolutely horrified. He didn't see me, so I slowly made my way up to the front. I briefly tell my coworker what's going on and then called the police and store manager. The cops took him away. A few days later, a detective came to speak to me. The two men were brothers. They were abducting women and actually using them for human trafficking. He told me I was really lucky. I later found out that they had apparently found a woman beaten to death in their apartment. They've both since gone to prison. This still gives me really bad nightmares. What happened to that woman could have easily been me, but thank God it wasn't.
This happened to my grandpa. I'm not sure exactly when this happened, but this was when all my younger aunts and uncles weren't married yet and still lived with them. In all, I had 7 uncles and 5 aunts, just from my dad's side of the family. Years ago, my uncles bought a house and my grandparents lived with them. A lot of paranormal stuff has happened in that house, and I don't know why my grandparents didn't move out sooner. At the time of this incident, everyone was out shopping or doing whatever they used to do outside of the house, and it was just my grandparents' home. My grandpa sat in his big chair, as always, and was occupied by the television. Usually, my grandma would stand behind that big chair and just watch TV with my grandpa. I don't know why she always did that when they had so many other couches to sit on. After a while of my grandparents just watching TV, my grandpa spoke. "Honey, go grab me something to eat. I'm hungry." My grandpa waited for an answer. "Did you hear me?" Silence. My grandpa was in his late 70s, so his body was quite weak. That's why instead of turning around to see if my grandma was still there or not, he reached over his shoulder to where she'd usually be. Instead of a shirt, however, he felt a soft breast that would belong to a young lady. Just as he was about to use his strength to turn around to see who or what was behind him, he felt a hand on his ear and side of his head. The hand then slowly started moving towards the middle of his face. Once the palm of the hand covered his cheek and the fingers reached his nose and mouth, he opened his mouth and grabbed a hold of one of the fingers and bit as hard as he could. As he spit out the finger, he felt the hand pull away fast. He finally looked behind him and saw no one. He didn't bother wasting his energy to look around, as he knew he wasn't going to find anyone or anything because, as he recalled, he didn't see or taste any blood when he bit the finger off. But unexpectedly, the finger that he had bit off had fallen onto the floor, and it was real. There was no blood or anything, just a clean, chewed-off finger. My grandma finally showed up as my grandpa picked up the finger. "Here," he said, handing her the finger. As expected, my grandma freaked out and asked, "What is this?" He explained to her what happened, and he told her to keep the finger for good luck, as he said. It may seem crazy, but my family is a religious shaman family, and we, or the elders at least, believe these things. I've actually never seen the finger myself, but one day when I was young, I saw my grandma in her room picking up a small, red triangular pouch that she dropped. I didn't know then, but usually those pouches were filled with herbs believed to keep you healthy, so I stepped into the room asking, "What is that?" She smiled before answering, "It's a finger."
This is my parents' story, and it took place in Colorado many years ago, back before I was even born. They're both natives, and have always been a very superstitious pair. That might just have saved their lives that night. They were traveling along $1 Million Highway through Red Mountain Pass after a long road trip. It was around 2 or 3 a.m., and my dad was behind the wheel, while my mum slept in the passenger seat. They both knew the road well, and Dad was driving cautiously. The road is notoriously dangerous for its lack of guardrails and sheer steep drops over the edge. At one point, Dad nudges my mum awake. There's something not quite right about the road up ahead. After letting her eyes adjust for a moment, she too could see that the road ahead was different than usual. After having driven that road so many times, they both knew that the sharp left curve they were fast approaching was going the opposite way it should have been. This part of the road was meant to curve right around the mountain. Always had, always would. Even the sign they just passed said so. Neither of them knew what to say as they approached the bend in the road. They both rub their eyes, but they're not seeing things. The road really is turning left, not right. But that was impossible. The silence was killing them, and as they reached the point of no return, Mum screamed to turn right instead. She needn't have bothered, as Dad was already spinning the wheel in that direction, knowing that was how the road was supposed to go. As he turned, the actual road seemed to appear before them, just how it had always been. The road that turned left was now just gone, as if it had never been there to begin with, and all that was left in its place was a sheer drop. Had they followed the illusionary road they both saw, they would have plunged over the side of the mountain. Dad maintains that this was some sort of trickster trying to force them off the side of the cliff and into an early grave.
I used to have a penchant for wandering around abandoned buildings when I was in high school. One time a friend and I decided that it would be a good idea to explore a farmstead that hadn't been in use for years. The whole experience was really bizarre. The farmstead was accessible by a long gravel road that brought you to a cluster of dilapidated buildings around a central barn. We parked at the end of the gravel road near the turnoff to the main road so we could walk around the property and just pull out quickly later. We went into the barn first, and there were deer bones arranged in a circle around the skull, and a bunch of blankets and wood stacked in a corner of the room. We thought it was really cultish and weird, so we left and started walking back to the car. Halfway down the gravel road, we heard crunching, heavy footsteps, and someone screeching behind us. Blood-curdling screeching. We sprinted back to my car and tried to peel out of there as fast as possible, but it had snowed the night prior, and my back tire was stuck in a puddle of melted snow. My friend was screaming because she was so freaked out, but wouldn't turn to look at the path behind us. By the time I had gotten the car unstuck, she turned around to see if there was someone following us, and there was no one there. It could have been a bird or something, but we both swear up and down to this day that someone was following us. I really thought I was going to die that day.
I'm a night shift nurse who has been working at a veterans hospital for the past 3 years. My unit is located at the basement of the hospital. I chose to do 12-hour night shifts because it was quiet and relaxing for the most part before the rush begins in the morning after we leave. Last night, I was sitting at the nurse's station at 12:30 a.m. catching up on The Walking Dead, and I had the urge to use the restroom. I go into the restroom, do my business, and everything seemed completely normal. This restroom is a unisex restroom, so the entire staff uses it. As I process to head to the sink to wash my hands and kind of stare at my face in the mirror to see if I look tired enough yet, I hear a slow sliding sound coming from one of the ceiling tiles above. It moves open, exposing the roofing, and just sits there. Now, I'm not the bravest person in the world, but since my curiosity hasn't killed me yet, I decided to hide behind the wall that divided the main sink from the stalls and just wait quietly to see what was going on up there. In the midst of this silence, a man's legs began creeping out from the roof opening. This is when I knew I had to officially run. I was practically shitting bricks at this point. He drops into the restroom as I'm flinging the door open and screaming bloody murder into the hallway of sleeping patients. He grabs the back of my scrubs and we both fall to the floor. My coworkers, who most definitely got startled as hell, ran to my rescue. They separated us, thank God. However, I had a faint scratch on my right cheek. He had a pair of wound care scissors in his hand. Security was called as my male coworkers detained him. I was in a state of hysteria and was ready to go home in the middle of the shift. It turned out the young man was a newly admitted psych patient who was trying to escape from the upper hospital floors. Apparently, his family forcefully brought him to the emergency room, and they were waiting for him to get cleared to go to psych. No one is completely sure how he could get away and end up in the restroom ceiling. The freaking restroom ceiling. Currently, my nursing supervisor and I have decided to switch me to work morning shifts now, but on a different unit. Unfortunately, after this event, now I really know what authentic fear feels like.
October 10th, 1999 was just another ordinary Sunday around our house. After the four of us returned from morning services, I helped Erin, my beautiful wife, finish preparing the last few sides for lunch. Just before noon, the children were called to the table, and as usual, a great meal was had. When we were all satisfied, the kids ran off to do their thing, and I assisted Erin in cleaning the table. Once I had completed my husbandly duties, I slipped away to the living room to nap for the few hours. Around 3:45, I was awakened by a phone call from my grandmother Annie, my dad's mother and the only remaining grandparent or parent on either side of my family. She had raised myself and my sister after our parents had passed, and we were all very close. She asked if I knew any young men that needed work as a repair maintenance man. Her last guy had gotten too old to do the work, and she needed someone new to help around the house every once in a while. I helped her out as much as I could, but between my long hours at work and driving the girls back and forth to their various school-related commitments, I couldn't be relied on to do as much as she sometimes needed. Although I had no one in mind at that very moment, I told her that I'd put the word out and get back to her the next day. My first stop was to Erin. She had nothing for me. A few calls were made to various friends, but they couldn't think of anyone. However, they promised to get back with if the situation was to change. It was a waiting game now, so I plopped myself back down in the chair and dozed off again. A knock came at the door just as I began to drift off. The interruption annoyed me, and for a second I considered not answering it. I decided to go ahead, if just to stop them from banging on the door. When I opened it, I was met by a smiling young man holding business cards. He asked if I needed him to mow the yard. I declined his offer, but just then Grandmother Annie's request popped into my mind. He was about to walk away until I caught him and asked him if he could do basic repairs, things like fixing broken garbage disposals. When I asked this, his eyes lit up and he said yes. In fact, he had been a Mr. Fix-It in his last job, but unfortunately there was not enough work, so he was forced to fall back on lawn mowing to make ends meet. I briefly looked him over and thought about it in my head for a moment. He seemed like a nice, well-mannered kid. He said thank you, which is more than you can say about most people these days. Finally, I told him to give me a card. I might have a steady job for him. He did, and I promised to let him know in the morning. I let him go, and I returned to the house to enjoy my lazy afternoon. The next morning, I called Miss Annie, my family's name for her, to let her know I may have somebody, and I'd be sending him over that morning. When I hung up with her, I called the young man, Mark, and gave him the address. I told him he'd be doing small repairs and maintenance around my grandmother's house. At the end of each week, he was to come over to my place and I'd pay him. Once the specifics were nailed down, he thanked me and went on his way. With that out of the way, I focused on the task in front of me and put everything else out of my mind. When I returned home that day, I rang Miss Annie up to see how Mark had done. Her report of his work was encouraging. She spoke on more than one occasion of how eager he was to do well and his great attention to detail. This news was very pleasing to hear and assured me I'd made the right decision. Life would continue as normal. That Friday, Mark showed up at 6 p.m. to get his money and thank me, once again, for the opportunity. Dinner was just moments from hitting the tables, so I had to cut our talk short. I told him to come around about the same time next week, and he took off, with what I assumed was a song in his heart and a smile on his face. This routine would repeat itself for the next several months. However, as time went by, Mark's smile would fade, and his appreciation seemed to become more of an attitude of entitlement. He got to the point where he wouldn't even say thank you, or anything for that matter, to me. He'd just snatch the money from my hand and walk away. While this behavior ticked me off, I didn't have to like him, as long as he did his job. I hadn't talked to Miss Annie for a while, so one Monday morning I gave her a ring to see how things were going. She said all was well, but I could tell from her voice something was bothering her. After a few minutes of coaxing, she admitted that Mark hadn't been doing his job as well as he had at first. Once a month or so had passed, he began making comments about money and not getting enough work. Since I was the one paying him, she had no idea how much he was making, so she said nothing. I assured her I was paying him plenty, enough money for a full-time employee, as a matter of fact. He had no reason to complain. When she mentioned he would get angry toward her and it scared her, I became a little concerned. Just to calm her fears, I told her I would talk to him that Friday. Even after we hung up with one another, her remark about being scared continued to eat at me. Miss Annie was very special to me, and the idea of her being afraid made me mad. I was determined to nip his behavior in the bud, but it became a problem, but I had to make sure I did so with a clear and calm head. Anger would only serve to exacerbate the situation and breed bitterness between us. I'd cooled off by the time Friday came around. In fact, I was in a pretty good mood. Spring was just beginning to rear its head, and I was looking forward to more sunny and warm days. Mark arrived at the usual time and had the now common scowl across his face. He attempted to snatch the cash from my hand, but before he could, I stopped him and said we needed to talk. He said nothing as I spoke, just stared with an annoyed look. I finished and asked if we had a problem between us and made sure to express how serious I was. All he could say was no and assured me we were cool before he slowly reached out for the money and pulled it from my hand. This time, he at least said thank you before walking away quickly. I couldn't be positive, but things seemed to be clearer, if not better. I wouldn't know for sure until I spoke to Miss Annie that Monday, but I felt optimistic about it. Things at work were very hectic that Monday, so I wasn't able to call Miss Annie until later in the day. Strangely, I got no answer, but figured she was out or busy and I could try again later. Work got busy again, and it was not until I clocked out that I could call her back. Once again, no answer came, but I decided to let it go until the next day. Tuesday morning was much quieter around the office. I had plenty of time to make a call. For the third time, she didn't answer. Now I was becoming scared. So I contacted the police and asked if they could do a wellness check. Miss Annie was almost 80 by then, and the chance of falls were high in people that age. I was told they would and to call back in a few hours. However, it was they who called me back. The tone of the officer's voice uneased me, and he seemed to be dragging out things. This made me mad. I was already on edge from worry. Although I'm not proud of it now, at the time it was understandable. I yelled at him to spit it out, so he did just that. They had done the wellness and found Miss Annie dead. This was unexpected but not shocking. Assuming she'd died of a heart attack, I asked what the causes were. When he told me that she had been murdered, I blanked out for a minute. Never in my wildest fears had I expected to hear those words. He had to yell out a few more times before I responded, and even then, I felt like I was in a fog. This stuck with me for about an hour, but once I had to tell my family the news, the weight of it knocked me back into reality. The only information the officer could give me at the time was that she appeared to have been attacked by one or more people with hammers or blunt objects. If I would have had my wits about me then, the second I heard the word hammer, I could have told him who it was. But that didn't turn out to be required. I give the cop credit for being kind with his words, even after I'd screamed at him. He could tell from my hemming and hawing what I wanted to ask, and assured me that there were no signs that she had been messed with, if you catch my drift, and I thanked him later for this. The rest of the family took the news almost as hard as I did. Miss Annie had become like a second mother to my wife, and my kids loved her greatly. We'd become very dependent on her after we relocated here, and the thought of her not being around was agonizing. It took a day or two before I remembered Mark and gave him a call. I didn't answer, but after I left a message to contact me ASAP. The longer I thought about it, however, it struck me as odd that he hadn't called me. The first day he received no answer at the door. He should have called me. My confusion would grow into full-blown suspicion once I discovered two important things. The pathologist determined Miss Annie had died sometime before noon on Monday, and perhaps the more scary of the two, Mark was still unreachable. The results came in that Friday morning, and the cops had been to his home twice and called him every day since I mentioned him to them on Wednesday afternoon. I expected to see him that evening to get his pay, but he never showed. This all but cemented his guilt in my mind. I told the police as much, and over the following weeks, they would come to agree with me. Other than having his fingerprints and blood at the scene, everything pointed to him. All they had to do was get him in a room alone, and hopefully he would confess, but just locating him to do this would be a 5-year struggle. Countless tips were sent in, but none would pan out. Finally, on a rainy and cold morning in January of 2006, an arrest would take place across the country in Arizona that would put the search to an end. The Tucson police would be led on a high-speed chase after attempting to pull a man over for expired plates. At the end of the chase, Marco Javier Robles would be apprehended, and our search would finally be over. Marco was quickly extradited back east, and the trial was soon to begin. What we feared would be a long and drawn-out affair ended within the week. The district attorney had offered him a very generous plea, and after a strong recommendation from his attorney, he agreed. He'll have to do at least 25 years, but after that, it's up to the parole board. If I have any sway in the matter, I'll do my best to see that he dies in there. We were left with only one question. Some would say the most important one, perhaps. Why? As a stipulation to his plea, Mark was required to tell why he committed the crime, and in full. According to him, Miss Annie had become very demanding, and he felt he wasn't being paid enough to put up with it. He had been planning on hitting me up for more money once summer came along. However, when he found out she had told me that he was unhappy with his pay, in his eyes, his chance for a raise was ruined. That Monday morning, he was angry about this and confronted Miss Annie about what she had said, and a fight broke out. He claimed she grabbed a poker from the fire set and hit him. In self-defense, he struck her with his hammer, but only did so once. His intent was never to end her life, only to make her stop. Unfortunately, it did just that and more, and my family will never be the same because of it. A less rational man than myself would probably put some, if not all, the blame onto myself for hiring the guy. I, however, am not that man. No one else but Mark is responsible for Miss Annie's death. Any other conclusion would be foolish and a desecration to her memory. If there is anything I would say I feel guilty about, it would be that my children weren't able to spend as much time with her as I did growing up. A better example of selfless love and kindness never existed, and I savor every memory I have of her. I hope I can live up to her example and teach my children to be half the human being she was. This happened not long ago. I'm 15 going on 16. I live in New York City and have had some strange late-night experiences before, but none as disturbing as this one. My parents were out of town. It was a summer night. I was at a pretty large party. There was quite a lot of drinking and smoking, which is expected at a party with a bunch of 14 to 20-year-olds. I'm pretty tall for my age, like 6'1", and I have a pretty deep voice, so I easily pass as older. I knew that I had to get home on my own, so I tried to regulate the amounts of drink that I had. At around maybe 2 or 3 a.m., I realized that I should start heading home. It was a Friday, and I didn't have anything to do the next morning, but still, I was tired and figured most people would be leaving soon anyway. For those of you that don't know, New York City's transit system runs 24/7, 7 days a week, so I wouldn't have any problems hopping on a train, even at 3 a.m., to get home. The party was in Far Rockaway in Queens, and I live in an apartment building on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, so I had a pretty long ride to get home. I wasn't worried, though. I was no stranger to long commutes on the subway. I would take the train everywhere I went since I was like 9 or 10. I headed over to the Far Rockaway, Mott Avenue train station and sat on one of the benches. There's a screen that says what time the train will be coming, and this late at night it would be a while. After maybe 10 or 15 minutes of waiting, the screen showed A train, Inwood, 207th Street, 20 minutes. I waited for a while longer until I saw the headlights of the train coming down the tracks. The train arrived, but since this was the first stop, I had to wait about another 10 minutes until it would actually leave the station. I got on, and a few people exited, leaving the car empty. I sat all the way at the end of the car, so I wouldn't be next to anyone if anyone else got on. At this point, I was really tired and felt like I was about to just pass out right there, so I did. For those of you that don't know, New York City's subway cars are rectangular with 3 doors on each long side which open at the stations and 1 door on each short side where people can walk through from other cars. I woke up a little while later to the sound of one of the short side doors close to me opening. A man who appeared to be homeless walked in, and the smell immediately hit me like a truck. I remember him having raggy clothes and tangled hair. He looked at me. "Hey, brother, you got $1?" Nah, man, sorry," I responded. "Come on, man, I know you got something," he insisted, smiling for some reason. "Nah, for real, I don't, I'm sorry." I didn't have any singles, just a few 20s, and I wasn't about to give this guy $20. He just stood there for a few seconds and said, "Alright, whatever," and walked away, still smiling. Now, this didn't strike me as weird at all, not yet at least. I've been living in New York my whole life, and I'd gotten used to all the homeless people in the subway and them asking for money. It didn't bother me. I looked out at the stop I was at. I was just in Brooklyn. The A train ran local at night, so my ride would be longer than usual. I figured I still had a pretty long way to before I got to the 42nd Street, Manhattan, where I would transfer to the Q train that brought me to the station near my apartment. So I went back to sleep. When I woke up again, I was in downtown Manhattan, I think like West 4th or 14th Street. I was getting close to my stop. I looked around and the train wasn't empty anymore. There was a guy sitting on the other end of the train with his headphones on, and in the middle of the car, there was a guy sitting there, head down, muttering to himself. I was pretty sure it was the same guy that had asked me for money before. I thought that was a little weird, but I wasn't nervous or anything. I just figured he had some sort of mental illness or something. After a little while, I arrived at the 42nd Street station. The guy was still there, and when I got off the train, he must have been going in a similar direction as me because he got up and off the train also. Now, 42nd Street station is huge, and I needed to go all the way to the other side of the station to get from the A train side on 8th Avenue to get to where the Q train was on 7th Avenue. Walking through the huge station, specifically the passage that takes you from one side to the other, I'll admit was a little creepy. It was eerily quiet for a place that usually is packed with so many people during the daytime. The only other people around now were late-night workers and homeless people. I arrived on the side where the Q train would be going uptown towards my stop. When I got to the platform, there were only maybe 3 or 4 other people that I saw waiting for the train like I was. I walked over to the benches and sat down to wait. I looked up and saw that there was a guy a little further down the platform on the side from where I came from, standing there, muttering to himself, like having a full-on conversation with nobody. I couldn't make out his face from where I was sitting, but I was sure it had to be the same homeless guy that I'd seen on the A train. Now I was getting a little suspicious. Was he following me? The train arrived after a few minutes and I got on. I'd only have a few stops from where I was to my apartment, so there was no point in trying to sleep. The man boarded the same car as me, and I could see clearly now it was him, the same guy. There wasn't anybody else in the car at the moment. I wasn't entirely nervous, but at the same time I was definitely on edge now. I tried not to look at him to avoid eye contact. He was still mumbling to himself, and now I could pick up on some things he was saying. Random phrases like, "Should I? Maybe. Help me." When I got to my stop, I promptly got up and got off the train. Honestly, at this point, I wasn't even surprised when the man got off too, still talking to himself. The station was completely empty. It was 4, going on 5 a.m. by now. I walked through the station, up the stairs, toward the exit, ignoring the man who was definitely following me. When I got to the street level, I started walking faster towards my apartment. The station was on 72nd Street. I still had to walk a few blocks further up to get to my apartment. I looked back a few times to see the man, still behind me, speaking pretty loudly now. I was honestly more annoyed than scared at this point. Maybe it was the tiredness, maybe it was the little bit of liquid courage left in me, but I was seriously done with this guy's stuff, so I stopped walking, turned around and said, "Hey, can I help you?" "I just want some money. I know you got some." "Listen, I don't. Leave me alone or I'm calling the cops." He said something about how I don't know all the stuff that he's been through, and then just walked in the other direction, still muttering angry slurs under his breath to himself. I continued home, shaken but too tired to think about what happened at this point. I got to my apartment and went to bed. The next morning, my friend who lives in the same building as me called me and asked if I'd heard about what happened last night. I hadn't told anyone about the incident yet, so I said I didn't know what he was talking about, and he explained. Apparently a neighbor in our apartment building who was coming back from an early morning jog or something called the police because there was a man lying outside the doors to our apartment. As he was arrested, he was yelling and screaming, resisting arrest, yelling stuff about how his life was horrible and how he was waiting to kill that person last night that didn't have the heart to hand over any money to him. I assumed the guy that he was referring to was the guy that I had encountered last night, and the guy that he was talking about was me. And he must have followed me all the way to my apartment, which, given how tired I was, must have not been that hard to do without me noticing. Who knows what would have happened if the police didn't take him away? The man was obviously seriously ill, and I do hope that he gets the help he needs. All I can say to you all is be safe when you're alone at night. Especially in the city, always watch your back.